Welcome to Ancient Spiritual Knowledge. I'm your host, Zoe Parker. And in today's episode, we journey into the mysteries of the afterlife. Across time and cultures, humanity has wondered what happens when the final breath leaves the body. Is death an ending or the beginning of another path? Ancient civilizations carved stories into stone, painted symbols on tomb walls, and whispered teachings across generations, all to prepare the soul for its departure. In their myths and rituals, the living reached beyond the veil, seeking to understand the unknown. From the moment humans first gathered around firelight, the mystery of what lies beyond death has shaped our beliefs, our fears, and our deepest hopes. Every culture has faced the question, does the soul dissolve into nothingness, or does it journey onward? In these questions, we see a reflection of the universal longing to find meaning in the cycle of life and death. For many, the body was never seen as the final home. Instead, it was a vessel, a temporary dwelling for something eternal and luminous. This belief was not born from idle speculation, but from visions, dreams, and sacred encounters that seemed to carry the living into contact with those who had already passed. In the deserts of ancient Egypt, tombs were not built as monuments to the dead, but as gateways. The pyramids and burial chambers were carefully aligned with the stars, suggesting that death was a passage to cosmic realms. Priests spoke of the Ba, the soul bird, and the Ka, the vital essence that lingered near the body. Through careful rituals, the dead were guided toward union with Osiris, the god of resurrection, ensuring their rebirth in the eternal fields. For Egyptians, the afterlife was not a distant abstraction. It was a reality so vivid that entire lives were dedicated to preparing for it, crafting spells, offerings, and amulets to aid the soul on its perilous journey. Thousands of miles away, the shamans of the Americas walked their own paths into the unseen. Through drumming, trance, and plant medicines, they claimed to travel to the spirit world, where ancestors awaited in luminous landscapes. Death was not feared as an ending, but honored as a return. The soul, they taught, continued to exist in a dimension parallel to the living, offering guidance and warnings to those who listened. Communities depended on this connection, believing that ancestors could protect crops, heal the sick, and reveal truths hidden from ordinary sight. In ancient India, the teachings of the Vedas and later the Upanishads spoke of samsara, the endless wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. To them, the soul was indestructible, passing through lifetimes like a traveler changing garments. The great mystery was not whether the soul continued, but how it could escape the wheel of suffering. Liberation, or moksha, was seen as the ultimate release, where the soul awakened to its unity with the eternal. This vision placed death not as an enemy, but as a teacher, urging humanity toward higher consciousness. These traditions show us that the longing to understand death is not just a matter of curiosity. It is bound to the deepest human desire to know where we come from, why we are here, and where we are going. In each myth, ritual, and prayer, we glimpse a truth that the ancients held close. The afterlife was not simply an ending, but a mirror of the soul's journey, woven into the very fabric of existence. Among the earliest sacred teachings about the afterlife were those carved into the walls of the Egyptian pyramids. Known as the pyramid texts, these inscriptions date back over 4,000 years and contain hymns, spells, and prayers meant to guide the king's soul through the perilous journey after death. They speak of celestial boats, guardians of the gates, and trials that tested the purity of the departed. Later, these writings evolved into the Book of the Dead, a collection of scrolls placed in tombs, describing in vivid detail the weighing of the heart ceremony. In this ritual, the heart of the deceased was placed on scales against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. A heart weighed down by lies and wrongdoing would be devoured by a monstrous spirit, while a heart balanced in harmony with truth would be granted passage into the eternal fields of peace. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians and Babylonians envisioned a darker realm. Their underworld was a shadowy place known as Kur, or Urkala, where the souls of the dead dwelled in silence, regardless of their deeds in life. It was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal, queen of the great below. This was not a paradise or a punishment, but a gray continuation, where offerings from the living could bring comfort to the departed. Though more somber than the visions of Egypt or India, it reveals a similar truth: the belief that life extended beyond the final breath and that the living and the dead remained connected. Among the Greeks, the teachings of mystery schools offered another vision. While poets described the underworld ruled by Hades, philosophers and initiates of the Orphic and Eleusinian mysteries whispered of a cycle of rebirth. They believed that the soul, once freed from the body, carried the memory of past lives and could ascend to divine realms if it lived in harmony with sacred law. Gold tablets buried with initiates have been discovered, etched with instructions for the soul's journey, including which rivers to drink from and which paths to avoid. These fragments suggest that initiates believed in a map of the afterlife, where knowledge was the key to liberation. The Celtic peoples of Europe spoke of the otherworld, a luminous land beyond mist and sea, where ancestors, gods, and spirits dwelled. This realm was not separate from the living, but interwoven with it, accessible during sacred festivals such as Samhain, when the veil between worlds grew thin. Warriors and kings were often buried with weapons, treasures, and horses, not as symbols of power, but as tools for the journey ahead. Death, in their view, was not an exile, but a passage into a realm of light and wisdom where the soul continued its story. These teachings, though varied in detail, share a striking theme. The afterlife was not chaos, but a realm governed by spiritual laws. Whether through cosmic judgment, cycles of rebirth, or journeys into hidden worlds, the ancients sought to prepare the soul for what awaited. Their rituals and writings remind us that for them, death was not the unknown. It was a landscape, mapped and navigable, where the fate of the soul reflected the truth of a life lived. When we turn from texts and myths to the lived experiences of people across time, we discover a more intimate layer of evidence for the afterlife. Ancient accounts of visions, dreams, and encounters with spirits reveal how ordinary individuals came to believe that death was not an end. In cultures around the world, it was not unusual for the dying to speak of radiant figures waiting at their bedside, or to describe landscapes filled with light, rivers, and familiar faces. These moments became part of oral traditions, carried forward as proof that the soul survived. In Egypt, funerary inscriptions often included personal testimonies from priests and mourners who claimed to have felt the presence of the deceased long after burial. Families would leave food, drink, and offerings at household shrines, not merely as ritual gestures, but because they believed their loved ones continued to partake in these gifts. Some texts describe dreams in which the dead returned with advice or warnings, bridging the gap between the living and the unseen. These dreams were not dismissed, but revered as sacred messages. In Greece, there are records of soldiers claiming to see the spirits of comrades on the battlefield, guiding them or urging them to fight with courage. Oracles and seers spoke of hearing voices from beyond, often in dreams or altered states, and their messages carried weight in political and personal decisions alike. The belief in Hades may have been solemn, but encounters with spirits gave a sense of immediacy to the idea that souls lingered near. The Indigenous peoples of North America also preserved a deep respect for these experiences. Vision quests, often undertaken in youth or at moments of crisis, placed the seeker in solitude, fasting and praying until dreams or apparitions arrived. Many reported meeting ancestors who offered wisdom, comfort, or guidance, reinforcing the understanding that death was simply another form of life. These visions were not symbolic, but real encounters with those who had crossed over, and they shaped the moral and spiritual framework of entire communities. Even in early Christian writings, stories of near-death experiences emerged. Saints and mystics spoke of leaving their bodies, traveling through tunnels of light, or meeting angelic beings who instructed them to return. While official doctrine often focused on heaven and hell, these personal experiences gave believers a more nuanced, often more hopeful vision of what awaited. Such accounts remind us that belief in the afterlife was never built solely on grand temples or sacred texts. It was shaped by the quiet, personal evidence of human experience. Whether through a dream, a vision, or a presence felt in the stillness of night, people across cultures sensed that the soul was more than the body, and that its journey continued beyond the veil of death. Across civilizations, certain images and archetypes appear again and again when describing the afterlife, as if humanity was drawing from a shared well of memory. The river, for example, is one of the most enduring. In Greek mythology, the souls of the dead crossed the river Styx with the help of the ferryman Charon, while in ancient Vedic texts, the soul was said to cross a cosmic river to reach the ancestral realm. Even in Mesoamerican traditions, the dead were believed to journey through waters guarded by creatures, carrying offerings to aid their passage. The river symbol becomes more than geography. It represents the threshold between one state of being and another, a liminal crossing that defines transformation. The journey itself is another archetype. Whether through deserts, mountains, or underworld caverns, the soul was often described as traveling through landscapes filled with challenges. In Egypt, the deceased faced gates guarded by spirits, each demanding secret words of power. In Norse mythology, the Valkyries carried fallen warriors across realms to the halls of Valhalla, where endless feasts awaited. Among the Mayans, the soul braved the underworld of Xibalba, filled with tests of darkness and trials of fear, before ascending to higher planes. These journeys echo the universal human experience of struggle, transformation, and ultimate renewal. Light is perhaps the most universal symbol of all. In countless traditions, the soul moves toward light, often described as radiant, comforting, and eternal. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the clear light is the ultimate goal of the soul, a brilliance that reveals the truth of existence. In Christianity, heaven is bathed in divine light, where the faithful are reunited with God. Even modern near-death experiences frequently describe a tunnel leading to a great shining presence, echoing visions told thousands of years before. Archetypes of judgment also appear across cultures. The scales of Egypt, the golden tablets of Greece, the karmic wheel of India, all suggest that the soul's deeds are measured, not erased. This belief reflects a deep human sense that life has meaning, that actions matter beyond the span of a single lifetime. Whether through balance, justice, or cosmic law, the idea of accountability is woven into visions of the afterlife. Animals and guides also recur. Dogs such as Anubis in Egypt or Solotl in Mesoamerica appear as companions for the soul, leading it safely through shadowy realms. Birds often symbolize freedom of the spirit, as seen in the Egyptian Ba Soul, or in Celtic traditions where ravens and swans accompany the dead. These figures act as bridges between the seen and unseen, embodying humanity's trust that no one crosses alone. By recognizing these shared symbols, we see that cultures separated by oceans and centuries often arrived at remarkably similar visions. Rivers, light, judgment, and guides reflect not only cultural imagination, but also something more profound: the collective human memory of the soul's journey, passed down through myth and mystery as a map for those who come after. For all the beauty and depth in these ancient visions, history also reveals how such wisdom was often resisted, dismissed, or reshaped to fit emerging systems of power. In many places, the vast mystery of the afterlife was reduced to a simplified doctrine of reward and punishment. Where one culture spoke of journeys, transformations, and cycles of rebirth, another authority might declare only two destinations: eternal bliss or eternal torment. This narrowing of perspective reflected not the limits of human imagination, but the influence of social and political control. When Christianity spread across Europe, older traditions that celebrated seasonal cycles and ancestral connections were gradually condemned as pagan. The intricate visions of Celtic or Norse afterlives were branded as superstition, replaced with rigid images of heaven and hell. The emphasis shifted from personal exploration of the unseen to obedience under a central authority. The complex landscapes of spirit became flattened, as the mystery was used to instill fear and maintain order. Science, too, brought its own resistance. As rationalism rose in the 17th and 18th centuries, anything that could not be measured or tested was declared illusion. Dreams, visions, and the felt presence of ancestors were labeled as imagination or psychological projection. Death became not a threshold, but a final ending, with the body viewed as a machine that simply ceased to function. For many, This new worldview erased the possibility of the soul's survival, cutting humanity off from traditions that had offered comfort and meaning for millennia. Colonization also played a major role in suppressing afterlife traditions. Indigenous peoples across the world, from the Americas to Australia, carried deeply rooted beliefs in the continuity of the soul and the guiding role of ancestors. When colonial powers imposed new religions and institutions, these beliefs were dismissed as primitive or heretical. Sacred practices, such as offerings to the dead or rituals of remembrance, were banned or erased, leaving communities disconnected from their spiritual heritage. Even within cultures that preserved their sacred texts, fear was often woven into the narrative. Tales of punishment, demons, and eternal suffering overshadowed gentler visions of reunion and light. In this way, the afterlife was transformed from a journey of the soul into a mechanism of control, shaping behavior through fear of what might follow death. Yet, beneath these layers of distortion, the deeper truths never vanished. People continued to dream of their ancestors, to feel presences, and to tell stories of journeys into the unseen. Resistance to the afterlife's mysteries has always existed, but so too has the quiet persistence of human experience. In the tension between suppression and remembrance, the soul's journey remains one of the most enduring mysteries of all. When the layers of resistance are set aside, a more expansive vision of the afterlife begins to emerge, one that invites possibility rather than limitation. Many traditions teach that death is not simply a doorway to another place, but an awakening to a greater reality. The soul, freed from the boundaries of the body, may recover memories of its eternal nature, glimpsing truths that are hidden during physical life. Stories of past life recall, for example, appear in cultures across the world. Children in remote villages have spoken of families, names, and details of previous lives that later proved accurate, offering tantalizing suggestions that memory itself is not confined to a single lifetime. Mystics describe the afterlife as multidimensional, layered like veils of energy that the soul passes through according to its vibration. Some teachings speak of astral planes, where the newly departed rest and reflect, while higher levels reveal luminous realms of healing and wisdom. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this passage as the bardo, an intermediate state in which the soul encounters visions, deities, and radiant light, all of which reflect its own consciousness. These encounters are not seen as external judges, but as mirrors of the soul's inner truth. The idea of vibrational resonance also expands this view. If the soul is composed of subtle energy, then the state of consciousness carried at death shapes the reality it experiences after. A soul steeped in fear may encounter shadowed landscapes, while a soul cultivated in love and awareness may rise toward light-filled dimensions. This perspective reframes the afterlife as a continuation of inner growth, rather than a fixed sentence of reward or punishment. Concepts of divine timing add another layer. In certain teachings, souls do not simply wander aimlessly after death, but are guided into new experiences, sometimes returning through rebirth at moments aligned with cosmic cycles. This suggests a universe that is not random but infused with intelligence, where the journey of each soul is interwoven with a larger pattern. The ancients who spoke of cosmic order, whether through the Egyptian principle of Ma'at or the Vedic law of karma, seem to recognize this truth. These expansive possibilities remind us that the afterlife may be less about static destinations and more about ongoing evolution. The journey continues, shaped by memory, resonance, and divine design. In this way, death becomes not an ending, but a threshold into a greater unfolding, one that the ancients glimpsed and encoded in myth, ritual, and vision. As humanity entered eras of conquest, industrialization, and global expansion, much of this deeper wisdom about the afterlife was overshadowed or forgotten. Colonization not only imposed foreign belief systems, but also severed people from their ancestral practices of honoring the dead. Sacred burial grounds were desecrated, traditional rituals suppressed, and the voices of elders silenced. Where once the dead were seen as guides and protectors, they were recast as ghosts or dismissed as superstition. In this shift, communities lost not just their rituals, but a vital thread of spiritual sovereignty. Industrialization further deepened the divide. With the rise of machines and factories, the sacred rhythms of life and death were replaced by mechanical efficiency. Death, once woven into the daily cycle of family and community, became hidden in hospitals and institutions. Ancestor altars disappeared from homes, replaced by sterile processes that reduced passing into a clinical event. The wisdom of ceremony of songs sung at the bedside and offerings laid at thresholds was pushed aside. This disconnection weakened not only the bond with the departed, but also the collective trust in life beyond the physical. Those in power often benefited from this forgetting. A society that fears death is easier to control, for fear makes people cling to material promises and external authority. By narrowing the afterlife into visions of punishment and reward, institutions could shape morality and obedience. The richness of personal spiritual experience, visions, dreams, and communion with ancestors, was devalued, leaving individuals dependent on doctrine rather than direct connection. Yet beneath these layers of suppression, fragments of ancient power still remain. Folk traditions in rural villages, whispered prayers passed down through generations, and rituals hidden in plain sight have carried remnants of forgotten wisdom. Festivals that honor the dead, such as the Day of the Dead in Mexico, or the Remembrance of All Souls in Europe, preserve the truth that the departed are never far. In these celebrations, the veil between the living and the unseen grows thin, reminding communities of the continuity of spirit. When we reflect on what has been lost, we see more than rituals fading into history. We see how humanity has been distanced from its own innate knowing, the sense that the soul is eternal and that death is but a doorway. To reclaim this wisdom is to restore a kind of sovereignty that cannot be controlled or diminished, for it reminds each person that they are part of a greater mystery, a cycle of life and rebirth that transcends the material order of the world. To bring the mystery of the afterlife into daily life, many traditions have emphasized practices that keep the soul's journey close to heart. Simple rituals can reawaken the awareness that life is sacred, and that death is not an ending but a passage. Lighting a candle for ancestors, speaking their names aloud, or placing offerings of food and flowers are ways people across cultures have maintained bonds with the departed. These gestures, though humble, carry profound meaning, for they remind the living that the boundary between worlds is permeable and that love continues beyond the grave. Meditation and prayer are also pathways of connection. In Buddhist traditions, meditations on impermanence guide practitioners to reflect on death, not as a source of fear, but as a teacher of presence. In Hindu practice, mantras and breathwork center the mind on the eternal self, preparing the soul for its eventual departure from the body. Indigenous cultures, too, often engage in ceremonies that involve rhythmic drumming, chanting, or dance, designed to align the living with the vibration of spirit and open a doorway into communion with the unseen. Dreams remain one of the most intimate ways to experience continuity with those who have crossed over. Across many cultures, dreams are not dismissed as mere imagination, but are revered as visits from the other side. Keeping a dream journal, setting intentions before sleep, or performing gentle rituals such as placing sacred herbs nearby can help cultivate this space. For those open to it, dreams can bring guidance, healing, and reassurance that death is not separation. Pilgrimage is another practice that carries power. Visiting sacred sites tied to ancestors or places where rituals of death and rebirth were once performed can awaken memory within the soul. Standing before ancient tombs, stone circles, or temples aligned with the stars, many report feeling a presence that transcends time. Such journeys are less about tourism and more about initiation, allowing the seeker to step into the current of wisdom that has flowed through countless generations. Finally, cultivating awareness in daily life becomes its own ritual. Living with integrity, speaking truth, and honoring the interconnectedness of all beings prepares the soul for its journey. The ancients believed that how one lived shaped how one would cross the threshold, and this teaching continues to resonate. When each breath, each word, and each choice is recognized as part of the eternal cycle, the fear of death softens, replaced by reverence for the unfolding mystery. Through these practices, the ancient wisdom of the afterlife becomes not a distant story, but a living guide. It invites each person to honor both the ancestors who came before and the soul that will one day continue beyond, weaving life and death into a single sacred continuum. Across time, the mystery of the afterlife has been painted with countless colors, from the luminous visions of Egypt to the shadowed underworld of Mesopotamia, from the cycles of rebirth in India to the ancestral realms of indigenous peoples. The teachings of the ancients reveal a profound truth. Humanity has always sensed that the soul continues. The details may differ, but the heartbeat of these stories is the same. Death is not an exile into nothingness. It is a continuation, a transformation, and perhaps even a homecoming. When we pause to reflect on these visions, something within us stirs. The ancients did not speak only in myths. They were giving voice to the same questions that live in every human heart. What happens when the breath leaves the body? Where do we go? Is there meaning in the trials we endure? In their sacred texts, rituals, and oral traditions, they sought to comfort the living and prepare the departing. In doing so, they left behind a map, not of geography, but of spirit, a map that points not outward but inward, toward the eternal within us. Today, many of these teachings remain fragmented, scattered across cultures and partially hidden by centuries of suppression. Yet their resonance endures. When people dream of departed loved ones, when visions of light appear at the edge of life, when the heart feels a presence in silence, the echoes of ancient knowledge awaken again. These are reminders that the boundary between this life and the next may be thinner than we imagine. The invitation is not to adopt one vision or to cling to a single doctrine, but to allow the mystery itself to deepen our lives. To honor death as a teacher is to live more fully, to value each breath, and to see every relationship as part of an eternal weaving. The ancients seem to know this, that how we live shapes how we cross, and that love and truth are the companions that guide the soul. Perhaps the greatest gift of these teachings is the reassurance that we are not alone. The journey of the soul is universal, and countless generations have walked this path before us. Their wisdom whispers that the afterlife is not an end, but another unfolding, one that carries us back into the mystery from which we came. Thanks for listening. This has been Ancient Spiritual Knowledge. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, gain access to bonus content, and unlock our entire library of podcasts, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.